Welcome to our first lesson in our second unit on linear equations. In this lesson, we will be solving equations using the addition and subtraction properties. So first off, let's talk about how we are going to, what kind of things we need to define first. In order to solve one variable equations using addition and subtraction, we need to know what an equation is. We need to know what a solution is, what it means to solve, and what are these things called inverse operations. So let's go ahead and get started. Equations. Equations are mathematical statements that indicate that two quantities are equal. Once we put an equal sign into a mathematical expression, we call it an equation. Solutions to equations are values of a variable that make the equation true. So those are numbers that we can put in for the variable or substitute for the variable, and they will result in a true statement for our equation. To solve an equation, we need to isolate the variable on one side of the equal sign. So that means to get the variable alone and all the other stuff on the other side. So the two properties of equality that we will be dealing with are the addition property and the subtraction property. You can think of an equation like a balancing scale. You may have seen these in your science class where you have a scale, and as long as you start out with a true statement or a balanced scale, if you add the same amount to both sides of that balanced scale, the scale is still going to stay balanced. That's called the addition property. In math, that looks like this. The addition property of equality says you can add the same number to both sides of an equation and the statement is still true. For example, if you start with 2 being equal to 2, we can add any number like 3 to both sides and get a true statement like 5 equals 5. If we started off with two variables like a is equal to b, we can add a third variable c to both sides and that would result in a true statement as well. So then the subtraction property is very similar. If we start off with a balanced scale, we can take off the same amount of weight from both sides and our scale will stay balanced. So mathematically speaking, what that says is that you can subtract the same number from both sides of an equation and the statement will still be true. For example, if we start off with 10 equals 10 and subtract 4 from both sides, that leaves us with 6 being equal to 6. With variables, if we have a equal b, we can subtract c from both sides, and that will still result in a true statement. So those are the two properties of equality that we will be using to solve equations. Now we have these things called inverse operations we need to talk about. So there are four primary operations in math: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And each of those operations has an inverse. The inverse operations undo each other, and addition, its inverse operation is subtraction, and likewise the inverse of subtraction is addition. For multiplication, division will undo multiplication, and multiplication will likewise undo division. So this is like the golden rule of math. We always keep the equation balanced. Whatever we do to one side of an equation, we have to do the exact same thing to the other in order for the equation to still be true. So let's go ahead and do some practice problems. Number 1 says state whether the value of the variable is a solution of the equation. So let's go ahead and try a couple of these. X plus 7 equals 13 for x equals 6. So we're going to substitute in, instead of x, we want to put a 6. So we want to know, does that lead to a true statement? Is 6 plus 7 equal to 13? And yes, it is. So therefore, 6 is a solution to the equation. Part B, we want to substitute in for y the value 12. And then we want to rewrite the statement, is 12 minus 4 equal to, question mark, is that equal to 9? Well, 12 minus 4 is equal to 8. Is 8 equal to 9? 8 is not equal to 9, so no, that is not a solution. 12 does not work. In number 2, it says to solve the equation, so we're going to do the inverse operation. In part A, we have 17 being added to n. The inverse operation of addition is subtraction, and whatever we do to one side, we must also do to the other. So our 17s cancel, and we get n is equal to 3. For letter B, the opposite of subtraction is addition, so we want to add 3 to both sides. And when we do that, our 3's cancel, and we are left with the variable y on the right, and then bring down your equal sign, and 10 plus 3 is 13. Now when you're solving your equations, I want you working vertically from the top down. Here's a couple of equations that we're going to solve working horizontally. I would prefer that you work vertically, but I'll just show you how these look when you work horizontally. Letter A says negative 5 equals x minus 7. The opposite of subtracting 7 is to add 7. And so these 7's on the right will cancel. Negative 7 plus 7 is 0. And that will allow us to get x alone. So then we know x equals 2 is our solution. Letter B, we have 6 being added to x. So we want to do the opposite and subtract 6. And again, the 6's are going to add to 0. 6 minus 6 is 0. So that leaves us with x on the left, and negative 1 minus 6 is negative 7. And finally, I know you've been waiting for some fractions. This one says 1/2 is added to x, so we're going to do the opposite and subtract 1/2. The easy part, right? Take the 1/2, take it away, and that adds to 0, so we still have our x on the left. Here's our equal sign. Now the difficult part of this one, you must have like denominators whenever you add and subtract fractions. So we have 3/4 minus 1/2, but I need to write 1/2 in terms of fourths. So I need to multiply the denominator by 2 to make it a 4, right? So I also need to multiply the numerator by 2. Whatever you multiply by, this number has to be the same number over itself, so you're not changing the value of the fraction. So this is the same as 2/4 is the same as 1/2. So now we can actually subtract. We know our denominator is going to be a 4. That stays the same. And then in the numerator, we have 3 minus 2. And 3 minus 2 is 1. So our answer is 1/4. And then number 4 says the temperature in Lubbock, Texas rose 16 degrees Fahrenheit in 1 week to 97 degrees Fahrenheit. At what temperature did the week begin? Well, we want to write an equation to represent the situation. So we have some temperature that we started with, and then it went up 16 degrees. So we might say T plus 16 equals, and it ended at 97 degrees. Well, how do we find out what temperature it started at? We need to get rid of this plus 16. So the opposite is to subtract 16. And whatever I do on one side, I must do on the other. The 16's add to 0, and we get 81 degrees. And this is our addition and subtraction property of equality that I gave you before. If you need to see those, I'll go ahead and reveal those again for you to write down. And that'll do it for this video. See you next time.